All right, thank you for tuning in to Chompin at the Bit. This is now episode 3. And on this episode, we're going to continue with the second part of our NFL preview show. So if this is your first time tuning in, after this episode, go back to episode 2, because in that one I went over the AFC. This episode is going to be the NFC preview show. So, but before I begin, it was good to see the NFL back as Houston and Kansas City went against each other tonight. Kansas City won. It was 34-20. Their offense looked great. They picked up right where they left off last year. Houston didn't look too bad. They had a big turnover in the fourth quarter on an interception from Deshaun Watson, which helped Kansas City seal the game. The stadium wasn't at full capacity. They allowed a little over 15,000 fans in the seats, so that's kind of how it is with the pandemic. I believe they're going to be one of 2 NFL stadiums this weekend that will allow fans, I believe. But the product on the field still look like regular football, so they should be fine. All right, so with that, I guess we'll get started with the NFC preview. And just like I did with the AFC, I will go through each team and give you the biggest story or question for the team, then give you a best case and a worst case scenario. And then, then the third part, which will be the next episode, I'll actually pick the division winners. So who I expect to make the playoffs. And I may give you an MVP and then offensive and defensive player of the year prediction. So definitely tune to the next episode for that. But let's get started with I'll do the NFC West, like how I started with the AFC West. We'll start with the NFC West. First team we'll look at are the Seattle Seahawks. And they're kind of one of those underrated teams. Well, especially Russell Wilson. I like him a lot as a quarterback. Seems like he doesn't get a lot of publicity in the media, but he's been steady since he's had the starting job there. And I guess the biggest question for me would be their secondary, because long gone are the days of the Legion of Boom. They don't have Richard Sherman anymore, no Earl Thomas, no Cam Chancellor. And it seems like the past few years they relied on Russell Wilson a little too much. So I'll be looking at, whether they can get their defense to kind of, help out. But I do expect them to contend for a playoff spot, for sure. The next team we're going to look at are the San Francisco 49ers. They're coming off a year where they lost in the Super Bowl to the Kansas City Chiefs. And history shows that the team that loses in the Super Bowl kind of struggles the following year. So I think my biggest question with them will be Jimmy Garoppolo and whether he can stay healthy for a full season. He was going pretty well last year, and he ended up with a knee injury, I believe. So the offense wasn't as good as it could have been. But I feel like there are still plenty of weapons out there that if he can stay healthy, then they should be right back in the title picture. Next team was going to be the Arizona Cardinals. Now, this is a pretty young team that's still growing. They have their superstar young quarterback, Kyler Murray. And I think with that, that's kind of my question for them is, after a full year of tape on Kyler Murray, you got to expect that defenses will be better suited to defend him. So can he raise his game to another level to still produce? Now, they're a team that I would say if he does take that next step, I would not be shocked to see them in the playoffs. It would be a little surprising because I'm sure not a lot of analysts are looking at them as a playoff team. But if you look at their roster, they actually have a pretty decent offense with some weapons. They have a nice young defense. It's got some speed. So yeah, I would not be surprised if they were a wild card team. And the final team in the division are the LA Rams, who I believe are moving into their new stadium this year, which they'll be sharing with the Chargers until the Chargers stadium is built next year, I believe. The Rams had a up and down year last year. They finished with 9-7. They still have Jared Goff at quarterback. They still have their young coach in Sean McVay. They recently signed Jalen Ramsey, the corner who used to play in Jacksonville. And I actually think that they may be a little better this year. The question for me is, now with Todd Gurley gone, will it be a matter of addition by subtraction? So Gurley, they let him go. He went to Atlanta, where he's expected to be the starting running back there. But it seemed like the last couple of years in LA, there was a lot of questions about his durability. And when he did play, he was always getting nicked up. And it always seemed like there was some underlying issue between Gurley and the team, where they would have weeks where they barely used him. And it seemed like he, wasn't pleased with that. So I think now with that situation over and he's not there anymore, I'm expecting a little bit of a bounce back year. I mean, maybe they end up with 9 wins again, but I wouldn't be surprised if they won maybe like 10 this year and got back into the playoffs. And it's okay. So now with that, move on to the NFC South. This division, to a lot of people, is seen as maybe the best division in football, with 3 pretty good teams and one that's kind of rebuild mode. And that's where we'll start with the Carolina Panthers. So they are coming into this year. They have a new coach, Matt Rule, who was a college coach that they brought into the NFL. And they have a new starting quarterback, as they are going with Teddy Bridgewater. And you know that Cam Newton is now in New England. So, biggest question for me, can Teddy Bridgewater continue his comeback from that horrific injury that he had when he was in Minnesota? He tore up his knee to the point where some people were worried if he might ever play football again. He was with the Saints last year, and he played, I want to say, like 5 games when Breeze was a little nicked up. He actually looked pretty good. So can he build on that and become the new face for Carolina moving forward. So best case, I mean, I think I'm not expecting them to make the playoffs this year. I think best case for them is you see like some growth in Bridgewater. The offense will look a little different, of course, because Bridgewater isn't Cam Newton, but Bridgewater is a guy who takes care of the ball, so wouldn't be surprised if they're in a lot of games and they may have some tough, close losses, but I see, them building towards next year. Next up is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, of course, this offseason their biggest story was they acquired Tom Brady in free agency. So now the case is, of course, you bring in a guy like Tom Brady. You obviously have Super Bowl aspirations as he's 43. And you don't bring in Tom Brady for like some long sustained run of 4 or 5 years. With him, you're looking at winning it this year or next year. On top of that, they brought in Rob Gronkowski as well. So, biggest question is, how long does it take for that offense to gel and play well? Because, like I said, you're introducing a new quarterback, no preseason. You have a new tight end. And how quickly can Brady connect with the wide receiving core in live game action? And defensively, they're pretty young as well, but they started to come on at the end of last year. So they definitely should be a playoff team. And then once they make the playoffs, we'll see. But, if you're a Tampa Bay fan, you can, think about possibly a Super Bowl appearance. Worst case, I see it takes, Brady maybe like 4 to 6 weeks to get comfortable with the new offense with Bruce Arians. They maybe struggle out of the gate, but I still think that they'll be a playoff team. But maybe it's like an early exit, one and done type scenario. So next would be the New Orleans Saints. And being down in the Atlanta area, it's not exactly a team that I want to hear about. But the Saints, I guess the biggest story will be Drew Brees. He's getting up there in age. I believe he's 40. So, the question with him will be, is he declining? Or can he kind of level off a little bit and produce for a whole year with all the weapons they have? Kamara, Michael Thomas, and Taysom Hill, who's their kind of utility Swiss Army knife type. They use him as a quarterback sometimes, as a wide receiver in the backfield. So, can Breeze, put it together and make another run at a Super Bowl, as he only has one right now? If he were to get a second one, that builds a better case for him in terms of, all-time great quarterbacks. Worst case is they don't live up to expectations and they either struggle to make the playoffs or miss out in that division where, you're looking at a Tampa Bay competing for a spot, or, the next team, I talk about the Atlanta Falcons. So as I just mentioned, the Atlanta Falcons are the last team in that division. Biggest story to me will be, I would say, their coach, Dan Quinn. Because it seems like Dan Quinn is already on the hot seat as he was last year. but they had a decent second half, and it seems like it's helped him keep his job for now. But with a team where you have Matt Ryan, who's a Pro Bowl quarterback, you have Julio Jones, who is seen as one of the best receivers in the game. You have Calvin Ridley, who's a top young receiver in the game. There's a lot of offensive weapons there. And with Dan Quinn being a defensive coach, their defense has been pretty porous past couple of years. So if he can, find some playmakers on defense and, shore that up a little bit. Like, they don't have to be a top defense in the league, but if they can be, middle of the pack, 12 to 15 in the league, then I think they'll have a good year. So best case would be, all that comes together. They make a, run to the playoffs. Worst case is the defense continues to struggle. Teams score in the high 20s and 30 points a game, and you're expecting that offense to try to compete with that. And I don't know if they have that type of offense, but they're an interesting team in the league. You could see them going like 6-7 wins, or up to like 9 or 10. I could see either one. So they are kind of one of those intriguing teams this year. So that takes care of the NFC South. We'll head to the NFC North right now. We're the first team, the Minnesota Vikings. And their, biggest story will be, Kirk Cousins and trying to account for the loss of Stephon Diggs. Now, Stephon Diggs has been a big part of their offense the past few years. He kind of, fell out of favor in Minnesota. They traded him to Buffalo in the offseason. So now, there's going to be more pressure on Dalvin Cook to run the ball. And now Adam Thielen becomes the top receiver. You can expect more passes to Kyle Rudolph, their top tight end. So, can Kirk Cousins maybe take his game up a little bit to account for Stephon Diggs' absence and lead that team to, let's say, at least a division title? So I'd say best case is, Thielen, Cousins, and they keep Dalvin Cook healthy all year. Dalvin Cook becomes, a top running back in the league. Takes a little pressure off Cousins, but Cousins shows that he can play primetime games because he has a history of playing well on Sundays, but when it comes to Monday Night Football or Thursday Night Football, he looks like a completely different guy. And, it's a well-coached team. They always have a pretty decent defense. So if Cousins can perform, then they're a team that can make a deep playoff run, definitely. Worst case will be the loss of Diggs puts too much pressure on Cook. Defenses load the box, and Cousins doesn't make them pay for it. So they become a team where the defense has to try to create turnovers to give the offense short field, and they don't do that. And they end up probably as a surprise team to miss the playoffs. Next team is the Green Bay Packers. Biggest question to me would be the mentality of Aaron Rodgers. So over Aaron Rodgers' time in Green Bay, he's been, I guess you would say, like a temperamental guy. And this off season, the draft, most people thought that Green Bay was going to draft offensive weapons for him. They ended up taking a quarterback in the first round, or the second round, I believe. So I guess they're, finally trying to put some pressure on Rodgers with a quality backup. They did give him a running back, A.J. Dillon out of Boston College, but they didn't really draft a wide receiver, which most people thought was their biggest need. So with that, if Aaron Rodgers can kind of take on a mentality of, he'll make do with the weapons that he has, and as a guy that analysts say is probably the best quarterback in football today, elevate some of those receivers to be better, then Green Bay should be back in the playoffs. Worst case would be they struggle out the gate, Aaron Rodgers starts pouting, and, there might be some pressure from either like the front office or fans to start the young quarterback, Jordan Love. And then probably in the offseason, they look to move on from Aaron Rodgers. Next team, the Detroit Lions. The Lions are an interesting team as well, because it seems like there are some analysts that think Detroit could be a sneaky playoff team this year. And I guess with those expectations, biggest question for me would be, I guess, their coach, Matt Patricia. He's a guy kind of like Dan Quinn in Atlanta, where starting off the season, he is on the hot seat a little bit because they brought him over from Bill Belichick's staff in New England, expecting him to turn the culture around over there from a losing culture to a perennial playoff team, and it just hasn't happened as of yet. He has Matthew Stafford as a quarterback, and Matt Stafford will put up numbers. Seems like the past few years he's had little issues with injuries and staying on the field. So if they can keep Stafford upright, get him through the year, he should put up pretty big numbers. And then, with Patricia being a defensive guy, if he can get that defense to improve, up to, like 12 to 15, like I said with Atlanta, then in that division, there's no reason why Detroit can't be in the wild card picture. Worst case, Stafford gets dinged up, offense looks pedestrian, Patricia doesn't improve the defense, and he, could be the first coach fired this year. Okay, the last team, that division, are the Chicago Bears. The Bears are a team, they have a lot of questions. Yeah. Between coach, the quarterback, who they should start, versus who they're probably going to end up starting game one, and some questions on the defensive side. But I'll say the biggest question is, the quarterback, Mitch Trubisky. So he's a guy who came out the same year as, Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes, I believe. But Chicago, for some reason, decided to take Trubisky out of North Carolina, even though he didn't really start that many games in North Carolina. And since he's been in the NFL, it's been up and down with him. And, he's a quarterback who can scramble, run a little bit, but he is a little turnover prone. And it seems like he doesn't have the most accurate arm either. So a lot of their success this year is going to be tied to, whether or not the Bears bringing in Nick Foles to compete for the starting job, does that push him to the next level and he becomes a serviceable quarterback? Because, they have a good running game. They have some weapons at wide receiver. They still have Khalil Mack on defense. So if Trubisky, can show that he's not the player that's holding the team back, then they could be another team in the wild card picture. Worst case, they turn to Trubisky to start the season. He struggles. If they don't pull him quick enough and they go to Nick Foles too late, the season could be over already, and they end up missing the playoffs yet again. All right, so with that, on to the final division in the NFC, and that's the East. So, first team is the Washington football team. I mean, if you have been following the NFL, you know all about their name, and they changed it from what they were previously called because of, the insensitive nature of the name. They had all offseason to come up with a new name. Decided not to, so for right now, they're being called the Washington football team. And it's going to look weird, but supposedly it is just for this year. I guess their biggest story. Yeah, they're another team that has a lot of questions at the quarterback position. They have a new coach, Ron Rivera, who's coming over from Carolina. And his biggest job is to turn Dwayne Haskins into an NFL quarterback. I mean, he's still a young guy, but, when he was thrown out there last year, he did not look good. At least in the beginning. By the end of the year, he played a little better than his numbers might show. So, with this being his sophomore season, actually might be his third year, but, can he build a little bit, show some improvement, and kind of give Washington hope that they have a quarterback going forward? So that's the best case scenario, that he ends up keeping his job and they don't have to go and look for another quarterback next year, which would be the worst case scenario, that he plays this year, doesn't show any improvement, and they end up, with a top draft pick, and there's going to be a lot of pressure in drafting a quarterback that high. Okay, the next team are the Philadelphia Eagles. Their biggest question going into this year will be the health of Carson Wentz. So, if you're an Eagles fan, you know that Carson Wentz, the year when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, was having a MVP type year. He got hurt late in the year. Nick Foles came on, took them into the playoffs, and they won it all. And basically since that year, Carson Wentz has pretty much gotten hurt every year. So, for a talent like Wentz, he's a guy who can run for a first down. He has a big arm, so he can throw it deep. But, if he's not on the field, he's not doing anything for you. So, if Philly can keep him upright behind the offensive line and get him through a full season, then, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to be in the playoff race and possibly contend for a division title. Worst case scenario, he gets dinged up again, and there is no Nick Foles on that team to turn to this year, and they end up as a team on the outside looking in at the end of the season. And I think they'll have to take a serious look at Wentz next year to see if he's really a guy you can, base your whole future on. All right, the next team are the New York Giants. And I guess my question for them would be Daniel Jones. He's their, quarterback that they brought in to replace Eli Manning. He had a pretty good rookie season last year. He showed signs of some greatness. He's a mobile quarterback. He actually showed that he was more mobile than I thought he was coming out of college. But, they have some weapons at the receiver position. I mean, luckily he has Saquon Barkley to hand the ball off to. And Saquon Barkley is probably the best young running back in the league right now, along with Christian McCaffrey down in Carolina. So if Daniel Jones can improve a little bit, I don't know if the Giants would be a playoff team this year, but I think he can develop enough where they should be looking at playoffs next year. Worst case scenario would be, I guess he doesn't build upon last year and they kind of get stuck in the same place where they aren't really contending for the division. And I don't think they're going to look to replace him yet because he's still very, very young. But you don't want to get caught in a place where you're losing year after year, but you don't really see where to make any changes in your roster. And plus their defense needs to keep coming along. They have some playmakers on defense, but I don't think their defense is as good as it should be. So yeah, that's worst case for them. Miss the playoffs again. In that New York market, they don't take losing for very long. So there will be a lot of pressure if they miss it again this year. So now, on to the final team in the NFC. You all know who it is, the Dallas Cowboys. If you're not a Cowboys fan, you're probably rolling your eyes right now because the Cowboys are a unique fan base. They think every year they're going to win the Super Bowl. So the question for me is, okay, so this is the second or third year where analysts are saying that you have the most talented team on paper. So can you actually put it together this year to make a deep playoff run? Possibly make a Super Bowl? Because, the Cowboys still say that they're America's team, even though they haven't really done anything since the late 90s. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, you can't deny that they don't have weapons on offense. They have Ezekiel Elliott. They have Dak Prescott, who's trying to earn a new mega contract, so he's going to be motivated this year. They have Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup. So they have guys, the receiver position, who are good. They have what many think is the best offensive line in the league. They have some young playmakers on defense. And they finally got rid of Jason Garrett to bring in Mike McCarthy, who's probably glad to be out of Green Bay, not dealing with Aaron Rodgers. So best case scenario is Mike McCarthy comes in, proves that Jason Garrett was the reason why it couldn't all come together. He, puts magic touches on the offense, and the team takes off and, actually competes for a Super Bowl berth this year. Worst case scenario is, with all that talent, they end up yet again 7-9, 8-8, mediocre team disappoints and they, either win the division because the rest of the division doesn't live up to expectations, or they miss the playoffs completely, which, Jerry Jones, who wouldn't be happy with, because Jerry Jones is about winning, at least in his mind. So yeah, they'll be a team to watch because the Cowboys are on national TV all the time, so you probably won't be able to not see them. So yeah, that's the outlook for the Cowboys, and that takes care of the NFC. And so the next episode, I will kind of simulate the season, may come up with what I think the records for the teams will be, and then with that, I'll give you my prediction for the 7 playoff teams in each conference. If you remember, there are 7 playoff teams this year. And then I'll kind of play out the playoffs and give you who I think will be in the Super Bowl this year. So, look forward to that in the next episode. But, it's a good place to end this one. Thank you for tuning in, as usual. Appreciate you listening. Wherever you're listening, you can subscribe to the show. If you're on the Facebook page, follow the show. It's at Chompin the Bit, Facebook page. If you are on Twitter, it's at Chompin Podcast. Definitely give a show the follow. And also on both platforms, you can, comment whatever, what you like about the show, what you don't like, any topics or anything like that. And, yeah. So I hope you, enjoyed the episode. Be safe out there. And I'll definitely catch you in the next episode. All right. Bye.